Jack Harper gazed out from the panoramic window of his penthouse. The shimmering expanse of Central Park stretched below him. The city pulsed with life, a contrast to the stillness within his meticulously designed home. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, screamed wealth and success. Yet amidst the luxury, there was a silence Jack couldn't escape. At 38, he was at the pinnacle of his career. As the founder of Harper Innovations, his name was synonymous with cutting-edge technology and groundbreaking ideas. The world marveled at his genius, hailing him as a visionary. But when the applause faded, Jack found himself alone, haunted by an intangible void. His accomplishments felt hollow, unable to erase the shadows of his past. Nights like this, the quiet grew unbearable. Jack often found himself wandering the city's iconic landmarks, as if their timeless grandeur could offer him clarity. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was one of his frequent haunts. He'd stand before the ancient relics, imagining the lives of those who had come before, wondering if they too had carried burdens they couldn't share. Sometimes he'd drift to Times Square, the dazzling lights and chaotic energy a sharp contrast to the stillness he carried inside. Other nights, it was the steps of the New York Public Library, where he would sit, feeling the weight of history pressing against the weight of his regrets. These excursions did little to soothe him. They were distractions, fleeting escapes from the persistent guilt that lingered. Jack had spent years building his empire, but in doing so, he had left behind pieces of himself, pieces he wasn't sure he could ever recover. The city never slept, but tonight, Jack wished he could. Instead, he poured another drink, the night stretching endlessly ahead. "Mr. Harper, there's a matter requiring your attention," Olivia, Jack's assistant, said as she entered his office. She carried her tablet with the poised efficiency Jack had come to rely on, but today her tone was softer, more cautious. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting from the view of Central Park outside his office to her. "What is it, Olivia?" he asked, barely masking the fatigue in his voice. "A shelter in Brooklyn. Haven's Hope. They've reached out for support." Olivia began, scrolling through her notes. "They're struggling financially, and their director is hosting a fundraiser to keep the place running." Jack raised a skeptical eyebrow. He received dozens of requests for donations every week. Most were handled by his philanthropy team without crossing his desk. "And this is different because..." Olivia hesitated, then met his gaze. "The shelter is run by Claire Morgan." The name hit him like a gut punch. Claire. Jack sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. "Claire Morgan," he repeated, his voice hollow. It had been over a decade since he last saw her, but the memories came flooding back. Their laughter, their arguments, and the way he had walked away, choosing his career over her. "She didn't reach out to you directly," Olivia clarified, as if anticipating his thoughts. "But given your history, I thought you'd want to know." Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. He could have ignored it, written a check, and moved on. But the guilt that had been gnawing at him for years made it impossible. "Fine," he said after a long pause. "I'll attend the fundraiser. Just make the arrangements." As Olivia left, Jack stared out the window, his reflection in the glass almost unrecognizable. This wasn't just another shelter. This was Claire. The converted warehouse in Brooklyn buzzed with energy. Its rough brick walls draped with soft lighting and banners reading, "Hope for All." Despite the shelter's limited resources, the organizers had managed to create a warm and inviting atmosphere. Round tables adorned with modest floral arrangements filled the room, while a small jazz band played softly in the background. The crowd was a mix of local donors, community members, and a handful of well-dressed elites who had been drawn by the promise of rubbing shoulders with Jack Harper. Jack entered the room with practiced ease, his tailored suit drawing glances from every corner. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Claire as she addressed the crowd from a small stage. Time hadn't diminished her presence. If anything, the years had made her stronger. Her voice carried a mix of conviction and warmth as she spoke about the shelter's mission and the growing need for support. "For so many in our community, Haven's Hope isn't just a shelter, it's a second chance," Claire said, her eyes scanning the room with quiet determination. "We've seen lives rebuilt here, but we can't do it alone. Tonight, your generosity can help us keep our doors open." Jack felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name as he listened. Claire's passion was unchanged, her words cutting through the noise of his carefully controlled life. When the applause rose, he found himself stepping forward, Olivia trailing behind with the check he'd prepared. As the room quieted, Jack approached the stage, his presence magnetic. "I believe in second chances," he said simply, handing the check to Claire. Her eyes widened as she saw the number, the crowd murmuring in astonishment. "Thank you, Jack," Claire managed, her voice faltering only slightly. Before she could say more, a small hand tugged at Jack's sleeve. He turned to find a boy, no older than 8, with wide, hopeful eyes. "You're my dad," the boy declared, his voice clear enough to stop every conversation in the room. The room fell into stunned silence. Jack froze, his heart pounding as he looked from the boy to Claire. Her expression shifted from surprise to panic, her lips parting as if to speak. The boy stood firm, his gaze locked on Jack. "I know you're my dad," he said again, his voice trembling with both fear and hope. The room erupted in applause as Jack handed over the check, the 6-figure donation leaving many in awe. Claire's voice quivered slightly as she tried to regain her composure. "We are beyond grateful for this generosity," she began, but before she could continue, a small voice pierced through the clamor. "You're my dad!" The words, clear and direct, froze the room. Conversations died mid-sentence, heads turned, and eyes fell on the source, a young boy standing at Jack's side. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, his messy brown hair and bright eyes wide with emotion. Jack looked down, startled. The boy clutched his sleeve, his tiny hand trembling yet firm in its grip. "I know you're my dad," the boy said again, his voice louder this time, as if afraid Jack hadn't heard him the first time. A hush fell over the crowd. The jazz band stopped playing. All eyes were on Jack and the boy, with Claire frozen on the stage, her expression a mixture of shock and something unreadable. Jack shook his head, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "I think you've got the wrong guy, kid," he said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. His gaze shifted quickly to Claire, whose face had turned pale. The boy didn't back down. "You are," he insisted, his voice breaking slightly. Tears welled up in his eyes, but his determination didn't falter. Jack knelt down to the boy's level, trying to keep his voice steady. "Listen, kid," he said gently, "I'm not your dad. I've never even met you before." As the words left his mouth, Jack found himself staring into the boy's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about those eyes. His heart thudded in his chest as he tried to push the thought away. Claire finally stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. "Leo," she said softly, her voice strained, "come here." She extended her hand toward the boy, her eyes darting nervously between him and Jack. The boy hesitated, but let go of Jack's sleeve. He stepped toward Claire, his head hanging slightly. Jack stood, his mind racing, the boy's resemblance to someone, him, still gnawing at him. The room remained silent, tension thick in the air. Jack looked around, aware of the growing whispers. For the first time in years, he felt utterly unmoored. Claire's heart raced as she led Leo away from the crowd, her hand gripping his shoulder. Jack followed close behind, his sharp footsteps echoing through the quieting warehouse. Once they were outside, she turned to face him, the cool night air biting at her skin. "What the hell was that, Claire?" Jack's voice was low but fierce, his eyes searching hers for answers. Behind him, the skyline of New York sparkled, an indifferent witness to the chaos unfolding. Claire swallowed hard, pulling Leo closer. "Jack, I didn't know this was going to happen. I swear," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Leo's just a boy. He doesn't understand the implications of what he said." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "He thinks I'm his father. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? And why would he think that unless—" His words trailed off, his expression shifting to one of disbelief and something darker. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Claire hesitated, glancing down at Leo, who clung to her side, silent now but wide-eyed and fearful. She took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Jack? There's a chance he might be right." The words hit Jack like a freight train. He staggered a step back, his jaw tightening. "A chance? What the hell does that mean, Claire? Did you know about this? Have you been hiding him from me?" "No," Claire snapped, her voice rising. "You left, Jack. You walked away from me. I didn't even know I was pregnant until after you were gone." Jack stared at her, anger and confusion warring in his expression. So what? You just decided not to tell me? To keep me in the dark? It wasn't like that, Claire shot back. After you left, my life fell apart. I wasn't even sure. She broke off, her voice cracking. I wasn't sure if he was yours. Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. Jack's mind raced, flashes of their past together colliding with the reality before him. He looked at Leo, whose innocent face mirrored confusion and fear. Why now? Jack asked finally, his voice quieter. Why didn't you tell me before? Claire's eyes softened, guilt flickering across her face. Because I didn't want to open old wounds. I didn't want to disrupt your life. Well, congratulations, Jack said bitterly, gesturing toward the shelter. Mission accomplished. Jack sat in the back of his sleek black town car, the muffled hum of the city barely registering as his thoughts churned. The car moved steadily across the Brooklyn Bridge, its iconic steel cables illuminated against the inky night sky. Jack stared out the window, the rhythmic glow of the bridge lights a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Leo's words replayed like a haunting refrain. You're my dad. Jack clenched his fists. The boy's wide, determined eyes burned into his memory. There was no denying the resemblance. The sharp cheekbones, the way he tilted his head when he spoke, it was uncanny. But Claire's revelation hit harder than anything. A chance? What the hell did that even mean? How could she not know? The car rattled slightly as they crossed into Manhattan, the skyline rising in the distance. Jack's reflection in the glass stared back at him. A man torn between the life he had meticulously built and the fragments of a past he had tried to bury. The bridge beneath him felt like a metaphor, connecting the person he used to be with the one he had become, forcing him to confront what he had left behind. As the car pulled into the private drive of his penthouse, Jack remained seated, his grip tightening on the leather seat. He thought about Claire's face, the guilt, the defiance, the wariness that hadn't been there before. And then there was Leo. The boy's innocence was undeniable, but his words carried a gravity that shook Jack to his core. He couldn't leave it like this. Not now. Not after what had just happened. If there was even a sliver of truth to Leo's claim, Jack needed answers. Stepping into his penthouse, the pristine silence felt oppressive. The luxury he once prized now seemed hollow. Jack poured himself a drink but didn't touch it, his gaze fixed on the glittering city below. He couldn't let this go. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Olivia. Get me everything you can on Haven's Hope, Claire Morgan, and Leo, he said, his voice sharp with resolve. I want details, all of them. As he hung up, he felt the tension in his chest solidify into something else, determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The brisk morning air carried the sound of bustling streets as Jack waited outside the modest shelter. When the door opened and Leo stepped out, clutching Claire's hand, Jack felt an odd mix of nerves and anticipation. He hadn't spent time with a child since, ever. But today, that would change. Ready? Jack asked, trying to keep his tone light. Leo nodded, his grip tightening on Claire's hand before she gently nudged him forward. Be good, Claire said, her eyes meeting Jack's briefly with a mix of trust and hesitation. Jack gave a reassuring nod and led Leo to his waiting car. Their first stop was Central Park. Jack had arranged for a quiet carriage ride, thinking it would be a low-pressure way to start the day. At first, Leo was quiet, his eyes darting around at the towering trees and open green spaces. But as the carriage passed a group of ducks swimming in a pond, he leaned forward. Did you know ducks can sleep with one eye open? Leo blurted, his voice tinged with excitement. Jack blinked, caught off guard by the random fact. Is that so? He said, a small smile forming. Yeah, Leo continued, it's so they can watch for predators. It's called uni-something, something hemisphere sleep. Unihemispheric sleep, Jack corrected, surprising himself. Leo turned to him, his eyes lighting up. You know about it? Leo asked, his tone shifting from shy to curious. Jack nodded. I read about it once. Pretty clever, isn't it? The tension between them began to ease as they traded facts about animals. By the time they reached the Natural History Museum, Leo was animated, pulling Jack from one exhibit to the next. Inside the vast, echoing halls, they explored dinosaur skeletons and glittering gemstones. Jack couldn't help but marvel at how Leo's curiosity seemed endless. It wasn't forced or rehearsed. It was genuine, and Jack found himself swept up in it. At the planetarium, Leo leaned close and whispered, "I want to be an astronaut someday." Jack looked at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. "An astronaut, huh?" "Yeah," Leo said, his eyes fixed on the simulated galaxy above. "I want to go far away, somewhere no one else has been." For the first time in years, Jack felt his carefully constructed emotional walls start to crack. Leo wasn't just a boy claiming a connection. He was something else entirely. Someone Jack wasn't ready to let go of. Jack sat at his desk, the quiet hum of his penthouse enveloping him as he reviewed the preliminary report sent by the private investigator, Marcus Kent. Kent was efficient, discreet, and relentless. Exactly what Jack needed to dig into Claire's life and uncover the truth. The report painted a stark picture. Claire had been running Haven's Hope for nearly a decade, pouring her heart and soul into the shelter. Yet it was a constant uphill battle. Donations were scarce, and city grants were insufficient to cover the rising costs of housing, food, and support services. To make ends meet, Claire had taken on personal debt, even selling off belongings to keep the shelter afloat. Jack scrolled through photos Kent had taken. Claire unloading boxes of canned goods late at night, organizing beds in the shelter's cramped dormitory, and speaking with a tired but grateful mother holding her infant. It was clear she had given everything she had, and more for the people she served. But the report didn't stop there. The mention of Leo's biological father made Jack's stomach churn. Kent had uncovered a history that Claire had clearly worked hard to shield. Leo's father, a man named Daniel Cross, had a criminal record marred by violence and drug-related offenses. He had been absent for years but had resurfaced recently, attempting to gain access to Leo through vague legal threats. Jack's jaw tightened as he read Kent's notes about Cross frequenting shady neighborhoods, likely seeking leverage over Claire. The thought of Claire and Leo living under that kind of threat while running a struggling shelter left Jack with a bitter taste in his mouth. He had been so consumed by his own guilt and success that he hadn't realized how much Claire had endured. The disparities hit Jack harder as he scrolled through photos of the shelter's worn-out facade, juxtaposed with the sleek Manhattan skyline in the background. He thought of the gala, the people applauding his donation, and the boy who clung to his sleeve. Jack set the report down, his gaze hardening. He wasn't sure yet if Leo was his son, but one thing was certain. Claire and Leo were fighting battles they shouldn't have to face alone. And Jack wasn't going to stand by and watch anymore. It was time to confront the past and the people threatening their future. Jack and Leo strolled along the Brooklyn Promenade, the iconic Manhattan skyline stretching before them. The late afternoon sun bathed the water in hues of gold and silver, casting a serene glow over the bustling harbor. Jack walked at a leisurely pace, glancing at Leo every so often. The boy seemed lost in thought, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. "You okay?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Leo shrugged but didn't look up. "It's just weird." "What is?" Leo hesitated, then finally stopped, turning to face Jack. "Being here with you," he said. "I've never done anything like this before. It's nice." The boy's honesty caught Jack off guard. He felt a pang of guilt as he realized how unfamiliar simple joys like this were to Leo. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," Jack said, his tone softer. "This place was one of my favorites when I was your age. I used to come here to think about stuff." Leo's face lit up slightly. "Like what?" Jack chuckled. "Oh, big things. Dreams, ideas, the future. You know, kid stuff." Leo's gaze drifted back to the skyline. "I think about the future a lot too," he said. "Like how I want to be an astronaut." He trailed off, his expression clouding. "But what?" Jack prompted gently. Leo kicked a loose pebble along the path, watching it skip ahead. "Mom says it's okay to dream big, but sometimes it feels like too much, you know? Like maybe I'm not supposed to do something like that." Jack crouched down to meet Leo's eye level. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Dreaming big is never too much. People might tell you it's impossible, but they don't know you. They don't know what you're capable of." Leo looked at him, his eyes wide and searching. "You really think so?" "I know so," Jack said, his voice unwavering. For the first time, Jack saw past the awkwardness and uncertainty of the situation. It wasn't about whether Leo was his biological son. It was about being there, showing up, and believing in the boy who had dared to call him Dad. As they continued their walk, Jack realized something profound. Fatherhood wasn't just a matter of blood. It was about connection, trust, and being willing to take that leap. And for the first time, Jack felt ready to leap. The envelope sat on Jack's desk, a plain and unassuming thing that carried the weight of his future. The DNA results. He had avoided opening it for hours, pacing his penthouse as the city lights flickered against the evening sky. The Manhattan skyline loomed in the background, a silent witness to his turmoil. Finally, Jack sat down, his heart pounding. He tore the envelope open and unfolded the crisp sheet of paper inside. His eyes scanned the text quickly, stopping at the definitive words, "Not a match." The breath he had been holding escaped in a shaky exhale. He stared at the words, willing them to change, but they remained stubbornly the same. Leo wasn't his biological son. The realization hit harder than he expected. A part of him had clung to the idea that this boy, the curious, determined child who had opened a door Jack didn't even know existed, might truly be his. That maybe this connection, so sudden and unexpected, was rooted in something undeniable. But it wasn't. The truth was now stark, irrefutable. Jack leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He looked out at the city beyond the glass, the lights of Central Park glowing faintly in the distance. He could walk away now, return to his carefully ordered life, and no one would blame him. No one except himself. Images of Leo flashed through his mind. The way he had confidently spouted facts at the museum, his shy smile at the promenade, the hope in his eyes when he called Jack Dad. Biology didn't define that. It didn't define them. Jack set the paper down and stood, his resolve hardening. Leo wasn't his son by blood, but he was his in every way that mattered. Jack had made a decision. He would be there for Leo, no matter what. The Brooklyn Bridge stretched before them, its steel cables glowing faintly under the city's lights. Jack walked beside Claire in silence, the weight of the DNA results still fresh in his mind. She had agreed to meet him here after his insistence, her wary eyes betraying her exhaustion. "I owe you the truth," Claire began, her voice quiet but firm. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the water below. "After you left, things got difficult." Jack remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after you left for Silicon Valley," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was scared and alone, and I didn't know what to do. I told myself I'd figure it out, but..." She paused, gripping the cold steel of the railing. "I met someone. Daniel. At first he seemed kind, supportive, but that changed." Jack felt his chest tighten as she spoke. "He wasn't a good man, Jack," Claire admitted, her voice breaking. "He was controlling, angry. When Leo was born, I tried to leave, but it wasn't easy. I spent years trying to protect Leo from him, moving whenever I thought Daniel might find us. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you. You had your life, your success, and I had nothing." Jack stared at her, guilt coursing through him. "I never wanted to leave you like that, Claire," he said softly. "I thought I was doing the right thing by chasing my career, but I was wrong. I should have been there." Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and something else, relief. "You couldn't have known," she said. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the sounds of the city surrounding them. Jack reached out and placed a hand on hers. "I'm here now," he said. "For you and for Leo." Claire nodded, tears shining in her eyes. The bridge beneath them felt like more than a structure. It was a connection, fragile but real, offering a glimmer of hope for the future. Jack sat across from Claire at the shelter's modest kitchen table, the faint hum of activity from the other rooms filling the silence between them. Leo was in the next room, drawing, blissfully unaware of the conversation unfolding. "I want to adopt him," Jack said firmly, his voice steady. Claire's eyes widened, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. "Jack, you don't have to do this," she said softly. "I know the DNA results." "This isn't about the results," Jack interrupted. "It's about Leo. He needs stability, someone who will be there for him no matter what. I can be that person." Claire looked down, her hands twisting together. "Are you sure? Taking on that responsibility, it's not something you can walk away from." Jack leaned forward, his expression resolute. "I know what I'm doing, Claire. I've spent years chasing things that don't matter. But Leo, he does. He's a smart, brave kid, and he deserves a chance at a better life. I want to give him that." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she nodded, a small, hopeful smile breaking through. Leo will be lucky to have you, she said. Jack's heart swelled. For the first time, he felt certain this was what he was meant to do. Haven's hope bustled with energy, but this time, it wasn't the usual mix of quiet desperation and weary determination. Construction crews worked side by side with volunteers, and the once faded walls of the shelter gleamed with fresh coats of paint. Jack stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, issuing instructions with the same precision he once reserved for boardroom meetings. The shelter was transforming. Outdated bunk beds were replaced with modern-sided private sleeping pods. The kitchen now gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and a new children's playroom, with colorful murals and toys, was being assembled. Jack's financial backing had made it possible, but it was the spirit of the community that breathed life into the project. Claire was everywhere, coordinating efforts with her tireless passion, while Leo darted around, eagerly helping wherever he could. "You think we can get it done by the grand reopening?" Claire asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she joined Jack by the new entrance. "We will," Jack replied, confidence in his tone. "This place deserves it. You deserve it." Claire smiled, her exhaustion giving way to gratitude. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Weeks later, the grand reopening brought a new wave of hope to the shelter. Local families and community members poured in, marveling at the revitalized space. Jack watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling as Leo proudly gave tours to visiting children, explaining the new amenities like he had built them himself. Life began to settle into a new rhythm for the three of them. On weekends, they explored the city, ice skating at Rockefeller Center, trying street food at bustling markets, and walking along the High Line. Jack discovered a side of New York he had long ignored, experiencing its vibrancy through Leo's wide-eyed enthusiasm. One evening, as the three of them strolled through Central Park, Leo grabbed Jack's hand. "You're really good at this, you know," Leo said, his tone serious. "At what?" Jack asked, looking down at him. Leo grinned. "Being a dad." Jack's chest tightened, warmth spreading through him. He squeezed Leo's hand. "And you're pretty good at being a kid." As the city's lights twinkled around them, Jack knew this was what he had been searching for all along. A family, a purpose, and a chance to truly make a difference. The buzz of the reopening event filled the newly refurbished Haven's Hope with life and laughter. Families explored the gleaming new spaces, children played in the colorful playroom, and volunteers served food in the bright, modern kitchen. Jack stood near the entrance, watching the shelter come alive in ways he hadn't imagined when he first stepped through its doors. Leo was in the playroom, guiding a group of younger children through an art project. His face lit up as he explained each step, his confidence and joy shining. Jack couldn't help but smile as he watched him, feeling a swell of pride that he hadn't experienced before. Claire appeared at Jack's side, holding a cup of coffee. "He's a natural leader," she said, nodding toward Leo. Jack glanced at her, his smile widening. "He's something special," he replied. As the evening wound down, Jack joined Leo near the entrance, where the boy was helping distribute gift bags to the shelter's guests. The last family left, leaving just the three of them in the quiet shelter. The city lights streamed in through the large front windows, casting a soft glow over the space. Leo turned to Jack, his expression thoughtful. "You know, today was pretty great," he said. Jack crouched down to meet his eye level, his smile warm. "I'm glad you think so. You worked hard to make this place shine." Leo hesitated, his small hands twisting together. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Thanks, Dad." Jack froze, his breath catching in his chest. He blinked, unsure if he had heard him correctly. "What did you say?" Leo smiled, his cheeks tinged with red. "I said thanks, Dad, for everything." Jack felt his throat tighten, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He reached out, pulling Leo into a firm hug. "You're welcome, kid," he said softly. "Always." As they stepped outside, the Manhattan skyline stretched before them, glowing like a beacon against the night sky. Jack looked at Claire, who gave him a quiet, knowing smile, and then at Leo, who stood proudly beside him. For the first time in years, Jack felt complete. Their future wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was bright.